Hello and welcome to this edition of Live and Ticking. Today is our Science Review of the Year, where we'll be reflecting on some of the most exciting research we've funded in 2023. I'm Fearghal McKinney, Head of British Heart Foundation, Northern Ireland. Every year, the British Heart Foundation funds around £100 million into life-saving cardiovascular research. And 2023 has been quite a year. So today we're going to look back at some of the incredible research projects we've been funding. We'll also be joined by Dr. Andrew Flett to hear about one such project, a clinical trial. In fact, Andrew is a consultant cardiologist at the University Hospital Southampton. He's also a leading BHF-funded clinical trial called the British Study, which hopes to discover if and when heart failure patients should be fitted with an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD. We'll be hearing from Andrew shortly. We'll also be joined by one of Andrew's patients, Stewart Adamson. Stu was diagnosed with heart failure in 2015. He had an aortic valve replacement and was fitted with a CRT-D, which is a special advanced kind of pacemaker called a cardiac resynchronization therapy defibrillator. Stu will be talking about his journey as a heart failure patient under Dr. Flett's care and how he got involved with the British Study. If you have any questions for any of our speakers today, you can submit them via the Q&A function throughout the talks. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A. However, if we're unable to answer your question, then you can call our heart helpline and speak directly to one of our cardiac nurses. You can also join our Health Unlocked community forum for support. This forum provides a safe space to discuss living with any heart or circulatory diseases. All of our incredible research is funded 100% by you, the public. If you're inspired by what you hear today, then all donations to support our life-saving work are very much welcome and appreciated. There's a link to donate in the chat box, should you wish to do so. Finally, before we get started, I'd like to ask you a quick poll question. How would you rate your knowledge of BHF-funded research? Rate 1 for very little and 5 for a lot. Give you a little moment to click on your knowledge level. And so this time last week, the BHF was hosting the 2023 Heart Hero Awards. It was a wonderful evening, which recognized the incredible efforts of fundraisers, the bravery of heart patients and their families, and the vital work of BHF-funded researchers. In 2023, we introduced a special award called the Research Story of the Year Award. Some of the biggest and most exciting research projects of 2023 were narrowed down to a top 3. It was then put to a public vote to decide on the winner. So let's take a look at the incredible top 3 research projects. First up, we have Professor Hugh Watkins from the University of Oxford. The mission of the Cure Heart team is to develop the first cures for inherited heart muscle diseases, which affect around 30 million people worldwide. Let's hear from the team.
We are aiming to come up with the first cures for genetic heart muscle diseases, cardiomyopathies. These are conditions you may have heard of because they can cause young people to die suddenly or get heart failure and need a transplant. And worse, they run in families. So you can imagine what the burden is like for the families. We know that cardiomyopathies affect a really large number of individuals. We would know that there will be somebody with cardiomyopathy in every school and every GP practice. In a family where there is cardiomyopathy that's caused by one of these single gene spelling mistakes, it runs down the generations, and each person can pass it on to their children, and each child has a 1 in 2 chance of inheriting it. So sometimes we find large families with many affected individuals. But we think we can now use remarkable precision tools to fix the precise genetic defect in the heart itself and stop that condition in its tracks, maybe even stop it from ever developing. And that would be a cure. Well, the great pleasure to me in putting this together was that the scale of the award was big enough that we could pick from anybody in the world. And so we were able to design a team that has really excellent geneticists and people who understand cardiomyopathy who've worked together before, but then bring in world-leading experts, including people who've created some of these tools, for example, David Liu from Harvard, and others who've become expert at delivering these tools to the heart, and that would include people like Eric Olson in Texas. So we have it's a dream team in truth, and it's been a great pleasure to put it together and then ultimately to be successful in this competition. I really do look forward to the Heart Heroes Awards. As a scientist, there's nothing more exciting than an opportunity to make really big advances. And if we can do that, it will be because of the amazing charity and amazing people that support it and that make up the BHF family. And that will be an opportunity to share our story and meet with many of the people on the ground who are making it all possible. Well, I hope the public would vote for this project. The BHF have done something extraordinary with the Big Beat Challenge, and they've given us a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really make a transformational step. Cardiomyopathies are common, they're serious, and we think we can change the burden of this disease for the many affected families. At the moment, there are really no real treatments for cardiomyopathy, certainly no cures. So affected families live in fear for themselves, for their loved ones, and for future generations. So if we could create those first cures, that would change everything for the many families that have these conditions.
Isn't that incredible stuff? Next, we have Dr. Rodri Davis from UCL and Bart's Heart Centre. Artificial intelligence is without a doubt fueling a new era in medicine. Last spring, Dr. Davis
My name is Rodri Davis.
AI tool detect heart disease in MRI images was starting its rollout in the NHS. Let's hear from the team now.
My name is Rodri Davis. I'm a consultant cardiologist. I specialise in cardiac imaging, so echocardiography and MRI. But I'm also a computer scientist, so I split my clinical time with academic work at UCL, funded by the BHF. And my research interests are in applying AI to improve the way that we use cardiac images. So my research will help patients in several ways. The first is that it will make things quicker, so quicker to get the scan, but also quicker to get the report afterwards. It'll also free up the doctors to spend more time with patients. But the real benefit is in the accuracy in which the images are analysed. So a lot of decisions that we make in cardiovascular medicine depends on the way the images are interpreted, and we make huge clinical decisions based on these. And what AI allows us to do is to make the right choice for the right patients. One of the challenges with technical work like this is actually translating it so that the patients actually get benefit from it. And the thing that we've done is we've used the most powerful computer in the hospital, which is connected to the MRI scanner, to put our AI on. So as the patient is being scanned, the analysis is being done. So by the time the patient has left the room, the analysis is complete. And this has allowed us to roll this out across the country as well. So we currently have it running at 8 hospitals in the UK and also one in Italy and the US. We currently scan about 20,000 patients per year using this technology. One of the strengths of the approach that we've taken is that we've been careful to make sure that this approach is generic. So it works on any scanner, it works for any disease, but most importantly, it works for any patient, regardless of age, sex, or ethnicity. The end goal of the research is to integrate data together. So currently we have imaging data, but we'd like to integrate that with patient healthcare records, genetic data, wearable data, etc. And this will allow us to gain new insights into the disease because AI can see patterns that the human eye can't. And this will really allow us to personalise patient care. It's the NHS and the huge amount of pressure at the moment. Waiting lists are going up. We don't have extra resources at present, so productivity and efficiency is going to help, and AI is going to be able to help with that. This can make a real difference to patients. A lot of the decisions that we make are driven by the interpretation of images. It's absolutely crucial that we make the right decisions here. And this also has the potential of affecting a lot of people. We already run this on about 20,000 patients per year, and we'd like to make that more. AI has the potential to transform cardiovascular medicine, not just in imaging, but across the board. It allows us to objectify decisions, it allows us to make them quickly, and it allows us to do things at scale. And with the amount of data that we're producing rising is going to be crucial for that. It's an exciting time to be part of it.
Now, after votes from the public were totted up, both of these research projects came runner-up to the incredible work of Professor Massimo Caputo at the University of Bristol. Professor Caputo is a surgeon who operates on children with congenital heart disease. This is when heart defects develop while the baby is still inside the womb. These children need life-saving reconstructive heart surgery using grafts, often when they are only days old. However, these grafts do not grow with the child, so they quickly fail, meaning the child must undergo multiple operations throughout their childhood. Professor Caputo and his team aim to develop a new revolutionary heart graft that can grow with the child's heart, reducing the need for repeated surgeries. Let's hear from Professor Caputo.
I'm mainly dealing with neonate infants, children born with congenital heart disease, which is the commonest things babies are born with. The research is about trying to avoid repeat operations all the time because the material that we use now is not good. So it means it gets rejected by the body. So if we implant, if we use a patch or a tube when the baby is born, you can understand this material does not grow with the babies and becomes narrow and becomes very rigid. These kind of research ideas, they come from the patients themselves or the parents, because they come every time to the surgeon and say, why do we need to come back for an operation again? Normally these babies, when they 1 year of age, another operation, then they, when they are 5, 6, another operation, and it's like constant life under the knife, as we say. So that's why we are trying to create a material which is seeded with cells that can grow with the child and not being rejected, and hopefully avoid all these very high risk and painful operations. Potentially it can help a lot of patients, because if you avoid more heart operations in the future, you reduce the risk of the operations, you improve the quality of life of these children who, they are very young, and even in their adulthood period, they're still very vulnerable, and each operation carries a great risk also, not also physically, but mentally as well. The dream is to create a material which could be a patch or a tube or a valve which stays forever with the child, and so they don't need to come for reoperations over and over again. The real drive for me is not to see my patients again, which is quite funny in a way, because you do want to keep in touch with them, and you do. They send you lots of pictures, lots of photos when they're growing up. But to see them coming for an operation, it really affects your work, because you know that I got children myself. To have those children coming every other year for another operation, it's really heartbreaking sometimes. I think the public should vote for this research, because babies born with congenital heart problems is very common, but also because these children really go through a very difficult times every time it comes for another operation. So they are the real heroes of this, and they really deserve this kind of award.
I'm sure you'll agree, truly inspiring work and a very deserving winner of the Heart Hero Awards 2023 Research Story of the Year. And that's just a small snapshot of some of the research projects we've been funding this year. Now, one of the most exciting clinical trials we've funded this year is being led by Dr. Andrew Flett, who we're delighted to have with us today. So I'll hand you over to you now, Andrew, to tell us about the British study.
Thank you very much, Fearghal, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today about the study. I'm just going to share my screen, get the slides on. Hopefully we'll get the right screen shared. Oh, good. Thank you. Sorry about that. So yeah, it's a bit about me. I went to St George's Hospital Medical School, finished there in 2001 in the south of London. I completed my cardiology training a variety of places in the south of England, culminating training at the Heart Hospital, which is part of University College London, where I spent time learning about cardiac MRI scans and developing a real interest in that. And my time there was supported by the British Heart Foundation, actually, with a clinical research training fellowship, which funded 2 years of my research. I then got a consultant job at the Southampton Hospital in 2012, where I've been working since, and specialize in heart failure predominantly, but also implant ICDs and pacemakers, and have maintained my interest in research and in cardiac MRI particularly. I also have 3 children, Harry, Oliver, and Eleanor, and a 9-year-old Labrador called Pepper. So before I talk about the trial, I do need to tell you a little bit about the problem we're treating. This is an MRI scan of a normal heart. You can see the 4 chambers pumping there. This is the left ventricle in the center. You can also see that the heart is relatively small, only taking up about 1/4 of the whole thorax here. In an abnormal heart like this one, you can see the heart has become much enlarged, and that the pumping function of the main chamber, the left ventricle, has become severely impaired. And this can be caused by a number of things. The most common one would be an ischemic cardiomyopathy, where a patient has had a big heart attack. And more or less everything else that causes this problem, we call a non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. So you might perform a coronary angiogram, find that there are no blockages in the arteries, which would mean they probably haven't had a heart attack, and that would help you to diagnose a patient with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. These days, more and more often, we're doing a cardiac MRI scan because it's much more specific and sensitive and will tell you definitively if it's a non-ischemic cardiomyopathy or not. I need to tell you a little bit about defibrillators as well, which was mentioned earlier. You can see an ECG here, and these are the electrical complexes of a normal heartbeat. And you see they're organized and occurring at less than 100 beats a minute. But some patients can go into an abnormal rhythm called ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia, which can be life-threatening. And you can see how chaotic this is, heart rates going over 600 beats a minute, and patients would likely collapse or potentially have a cardiac arrest in this scenario. You'll be familiar also with defibrillators from shows like Casualty. This is a very old-fashioned device, and this would be an external defibrillator. The paddles would be put on the patient's chest, and an electric shock will be given to restore normal rhythm. For the last 30 to 40 years, we have been implanting defibrillators into patients who we feel are at risk of sudden death, and the modern devices are quite small, only about the volume of a flattened plum. Goes under the collarbone here with a lead that goes down to the heart and looks out for these rhythms and can issue a defibrillation. Now, it makes sense that if patients with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy are at risk of sudden death, that putting in a defibrillator you'd think would be unanimously a good idea. But in medicine and in cardiology, we do like to perform research to assess these sorts of things rather than making the assumption. And this was a trial that was published in 2016 in the New England Journal of Medicine called the Danish study, where they took over 1,000 patients who had a non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, and they randomized them just by flipping a coin, essentially, to either get an ICD or not to have an ICD. And then they followed those patients up for some years. And this is called a Kaplan-Meier plot. These are the 2 lines that represent the 2 patient groups. Each time the line goes up, it means the patient has had an event. And in this case, they were looking at death from any cause, which makes sense. That's what we're assessing. And they found actually that the 2 lines didn't really separate. So whether or not you had an ICD or not did not make a big difference to your survival over time. And that's because although we know that the ICD is likely to prevent sudden death, You can also be subject to complications like infection, which could be life-threatening. You might also get shocks from the device which are inappropriate if the device malfunctions, and there are several other things that can potentially go wrong. And not to mention that actually these devices can be expensive, costing between £20,000 and £40,000. So we need to make sure that we're really putting them in the right patients. So what we've been doing up to now is just measuring this thing called the ejection fraction, and believing that that was the most important risk marker. And the Danish study has suggested that that isn't really the case. So there are other things that could be potentially important risk markers. So these are, again, MRI scans, still images this time. You see these areas of white within the myocardium, within the heart muscle itself. And we know that they could be important for a number of reasons. We've seen that they confer an adverse prognosis to patients if you have a bit of scar. And we've found that some patients that have had a sudden death have scar on when they have an autopsy. And we know that they can set up abnormal circuits in the heart, electrical circuits. And what's interesting is that it's very easy to detect this with an MRI scan. It's not a difficult thing to do. So we decided that we wanted to run a randomized controlled trial of patients that have scar in the heart with a non-ischemic cardiomyopathy being randomized to get an ICD or to not get an ICD. And this is what the British Heart Foundation have funded us to do, nearly £1.8 million to run this study. And I wanted the title to be British in response to the Danish study. So it was really a play on that. So I managed to get this title to fit. The design of the study is a multi-center trial in at least 35 hospitals in the UK. We'll be recruiting over 2,500 patients with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy and impaired heart function over 3 years. And all the patients will need to have had an MRI scan as part of their care, which is routine practice now. The patients that have scar within the heart will be randomized to get an ICD or to get a tiny heart monitoring device, which can be implanted in about 10 minutes so that we can see if they have abnormal rhythms. And then if patients don't have scar, then they can go into a registry. And what that means is we just follow them up and see what happens, because we know from Danish, they don't necessarily benefit from an ICD, and that decision will be left down to the clinicians looking after the patient. We'll be looking at all-cause mortality. So essentially, how many patients are alive in each group at the end of the 3 years of follow-up. This will be a definitive study, and we'll be able to answer the question of whether patients that have scar and severe heart failure need an implantable defibrillator. It will likely influence the international guidelines, whatever the outcome. And we'll also be able to answer lots of other research questions. All our MRI scans will be analysed in a core lab, actually conducted with Rodri Davies, who you saw one of the videos earlier, using AI to analyse the scans to look for other things which could be important in terms of risk. I'm just going to show you this short video. Let me just make sure I could share the sound first, which explains the study from a patient perspective, if this was to be a patient that may be suitable for the study.
The doctors looking after you have diagnosed non-ischemic cardiomyopathy as the cause of your heart failure. This is a medical condition where the beating and pumping action of the heart is reduced, even though the blood supply to the heart is normal. Your doctors have also identified an area of scarring in the heart on a magnetic resonance imaging scan. Because you have non-ischemic cardiomyopathy and scar, we're asking whether you'd like to be involved in a research study called the British Heart Foundation, or BHF, British Trial. This video describes what's involved. People with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy and scar are at increased risk of developing fast and potentially life-threatening electrical rhythm disturbances in the lower chambers of the heart. Implantable cardioverter defibrillators, or ICDs, are a means of treating these heart rhythm problems. They consist of a small battery-powered computer or generator and fine flexible leads. The ICD monitors your heart rhythm and can deliver an electric shock to correct a dangerous heart rhythm if one is detected. An ICD is implanted under local anaesthetic, either through a small cut under the collarbone, where the electrical leads are guided into the heart using X-rays, or it is placed under the skin overlying the heart, known as a subcutaneous ICD. Your doctors will advise which type is right for you. ICDs have been widely used throughout the world for many years. In some patients, we know they can be life-saving. However, we do not know whether an ICD definitely improves survival in patients with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy and SCAR. The British trial is designed to answer this question. By taking part, you have the potential to help guide treatment for others with similar heart problems in the future. ICD insertion is not completely risk-free. About 1 in 30 people experience minor complications, including bleeding or lead displacement, which may require a second procedure. There is also a small amount of X-ray needed. Less common but more serious risks include infection, puncture of the heart, or puncture of a lung, which may require another procedure to release blood from around the heart or air from around the lung. There is also a chance of the ICD issuing a shock you don't need. The overall risk of a complication arises in about 1 in 6 people. In any medical treatment, the risks should be outweighed by the benefits. When this is not known, we undertake trials to test if one treatment approach is better than another. If you agree to take part in this trial, you will be allocated to a group that either receives an ICD or to another group that does not. The groups are decided randomly by a computer. This is called randomization and means that you have a 50-50 chance of being in either group, which allows a fair comparison between the groups. The group that does not receive an ICD will receive an implantable loop recorder, or ILR, a slim device that monitors heart rhythm and is implanted under local anaesthetic beneath the skin in a simple procedure that takes about 10 minutes. Risks include bruising, bleeding and infection, each arising in about 1 in 200 people. These devices do not deliver a shock like an ICD, but continuously monitor your heart rhythm, remotely transmitting information to your hospital heart team so they can contact you if any additional treatment is needed during the trial. If you agree to take part, we will collect a blood sample which will be stored for future genetic tests. We will collect information about your medical history and heart function. You will also be asked to complete some questionnaires to assess your health and quality of life at the start and end of the study. We will contact you 3 years after your procedure by telephone. You will not need to attend any extra hospital visits for this study. We will also collect information about your health from your health records for up to 10 years. The information we collect about you will be kept confidential. Whichever group you are in, you will continue to be looked after by your usual healthcare team. The decision to participate is yours. You should consider the potential benefits and risks of taking part, as well as the commitment over time. There is no payment for participation. We encourage you to discuss this with your doctor or nurse if you have any concerns. If you decide not to take part, you will continue to receive routine care from your medical team. Once you've watched this video, there will be an opportunity to speak to your doctor or nurse. Please ask any questions you may have. You will need to read the participant information sheet and will have another opportunity to ask questions. If you agree to participate, you will then be asked for your written consent. Thank you for taking the time to consider participating in the BHF British trial.
That's the end of my presentation. Very happy to take any questions or discussion around that.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And we'll have a question and answer session later after our next speaker. And we're now going to hear from Stewart Adamson, who's a patient of yours, about his journey with heart failure and how he got involved with the British study. Stu will also be joined by Jana Theodoro from the research engagement team. Over to you, Stu and Jana.
Thank you, Fearghal. Thanks so much. And thanks, Stu, for being here. We really appreciate you joining us today to talk about your journey and how you got involved with the study. But just to start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your hobbies, just to get to know you a bit.
So, hello everyone, I'm Stewart Adamson. I live in Southampton with my wife, Sarah, and my two children, Penny and Fraser. And we live there quite nicely. I work in the fire and rescue service, which you can probably see from my jacket. I've just dipped out of work to join you this afternoon. And like my hobbies kind of involve lots of different things, active as much as possible. I am heavily involved in the local swimming club where my children swim, and we also have a little camper van, a little VW camper van, which we like to go away in. So that's kind of me,
that's
really.
Lovely. That's so lovely. It sounds idyllic. So you're a patient of Dr. Flett. When did you start experiencing symptoms with your heart?
So in around 2014, I started getting very infrequent actual occurrences of not being able to breathe properly at night. And it just sort of felt, really kind of odd, almost like I was drowning. And that carried on all the way throughout the year. And then towards the end of the year, about October, November, I did the Great South Run in Portsmouth, which 10-mile run for those of you who know. I used to like doing my running, and I wasn't very good, but I was all right at plodding around. But I found it incredibly difficult, and it took me about 3 weeks to recover. I did a terrible time, and I was just really kind of put off by it all. Anyway, I went to the doctors just after Christmas, and the GP sent me for a chest X-ray, and then I found out that I had heart failure from the chest X-ray showing that I had an enlarged heart. So that was when I then met up with Dr. Flett, going to his heart failure clinic in Southampton General Hospital.
And getting that diagnosis must have been a shock, right? How did it feel? Were you surprised? What were your questions when you first got diagnosed?
Worst day of my life, I would say. Really shocked. I had the chest X-ray during the day. Got a phone call from the GP that evening telling me to come in first thing before surgery started. So I was pretty sure that it wasn't all that great. So I then had the rest of the day to myself, kind of thinking, how am I going to tell my wife and kids that I've got heart failure? I didn't really know what that meant. It sounds pretty terminal when someone tells you you've got heart failure, and your core life organ is given out on you. So it was a pretty dark day, and I just spent loads of time just on my own, walking, looking at the sea, and just kind of working out what I was going to do, really.
And then you had your consultation with Andrew, and what was your onward journey from there? So I know you had surgery, didn't you? Yeah,
so I've got to say that the care that I received from Dr. Flett and his team was absolutely impeccable, amazing, but really put me at ease. The amount of information, the amount of care and attention that I got was brilliant. No question was a silly question, and I asked lots of questions, and I'm sure Andrew would agree that my wife asked probably 10 times the amount of questions, and was just persistent with getting the information that we could do. But it wasn't a great diagnosis, so it wasn't looking particularly great. So I just stuck to my medication, stuck to rigidly to everything that I was told. Everything. I was probably reading a little bit too much, maybe, but did all that. Went for additional tests, and then in the June of 2015, I ended up having an aortic valve replacement. I was in hospital for a month, a couple of complications and stuff, and came out, popped out the other end at the end of June with an ICD and a new valve.
Fabulous. And your recovery process, how was that?
So it was tough, actually, because like I say, I've always been quite active, and I was just amazed at how much I was just knocked off my feet completely. I couldn't even walk, to the end of the ward. So I made myself like a little circuit class while I was in hospital, literally just doing little leg exercises and walking a little bit further every day. Managed to rope in a guy from the army who was opposite me, and just try and keep focused on trying to get better. When I went home, I still remember outside of my house, there's a little hill, goes up the road, and it takes me about 20 seconds, 30 seconds to walk there. And the first time I walked up there, I had to stop halfway before I could get to there, and it probably took me about 5 minutes, so it was pretty hideous. But I've got to say, walking lots, keeping positive in my mind, wanting to get back to work, wanting to get back to doing things really kept me going. Yeah, I think after maybe about 2 months, I was back at work, and I was doing more and more, you know, kind of in terms of exercise, wanting to get back to operational duties in the fire service. So it was just keeping positive and keeping going.
It's amazing what a little bit of positivity can do. We've really found that when speaking to lots of patients on this show. So how has your life been with the CRT-D or ICD, special kind of ICD that you've had? How's that been like? Yeah,
so it's been all right. A minor hiccup. So I suppose there's a bit of confidence is probably one thing that I thought about when I was going to come and talk on here. So it really, you know, really knocked my confidence, just having a massive scar on my chest, a box in my chest, whilst it is quite small. It does, you know, you can see it. So that was quite difficult, I've got to say. I've got over that completely now. Yeah, it's just something that lives, you know, that I live with, you know, and I've seen and spoken to people that have, you know, had similar, yeah, so I think that is kind of one aspect. Did have a little bit of a complication. I know that Andrew mentioned in his presentations about inappropriate shocks. So I did have, well, 3 while I was out for a run in the park. My heart rate got a little bit high, and it set off, went off 3 times. But
what did that feel like?
So it felt like, the best way I can describe it, I was right by a football pitch, and it felt like someone was right in front of me and they kicked a football in my face, and it covered my chin and the top of my chest, and it felt like that. As it happened, I was really angry with no one in the park because there was no one around me. So I was like really angry, looked around, and
what rascal did that?
Yeah, and then I thought, oh, I know what's happened here. So spent my time trying to calm myself down, trying to get my heart rate down. Then a lady came up to me, and a little yappy dog was around my ankles, yapping at me, you know, not helping. But eventually managed to get everything sorted. Got in, and the team were brilliant. They sorted it out. They looked at, you know, what had happened. It was just that my heart rate had gone a bit higher than what was set, the upper limit. They reset that, and everything's good. So now I work out. I did a spin class this morning, you know, so there's nothing really that I can't do, other than the only thing that I have in my mind, or the 2 things that I have in my mind, is roller coasters, which we were going to Disney, and that was a bit of a drag, not being able to go on some of the roller coasters there because of the magnets. And the other thing, contact sports, which I was quite happy about, because my friends are rugby players and been desperate to get me roped in for years, and it means that now I've got a good excuse. But apart from that, I do everything else.
So it's a blessing then. You get out of rugby.
Definitely.
Oh, brilliant. And just finally, like, so how did you get involved with the British study, and like, what is your role in it?
So literally, just responding to a request from Dr. Flett, telling me that he was going to do some research. He was looking into you know, all the things that he's just presented, and was looking for a lay member on the steering committee. So my role really, I guess, is to be kind of the voice of the patient, I guess, in what is quite a technical field. You know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not medically trained at all. I know my own little teachings around the heart, but you know, nothing like that. But I guess my sort of input is, how does it feel like on the other end? What are the people that are, you know, inevitably going to be worried, going to be you know, affected by heart failure? What are they going to be thinking? So that's what I think I try to keep in my mind for those meetings, so that I can just play that in. So of course, when Dr. Flett asked me, I was absolutely delighted to help. I've had such great care and just wanted to, kind of be involved and pay something back.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I do have one last question for you, actually. How's your heart now, and how is your life now with the device?
I could do with probably answering that question maybe in March, because I've got an appointment with Dr. Flett coming up at the end of April, at the end of February. So hopefully what we'll find is good. So in terms of my heart was really big. It was really, as I think Dr. Flett described it, really flabby, not pumping very well. And certainly the last time I had a sort of full checkup, it had reshaped. It had got smaller, got more powerful, and all things, pretty good. So, whilst there are things that I can't do, it doesn't really affect me at all. Now I take drugs on a daily basis, but they're now second nature. It's pretty good, actually. From the prognosis and how I felt in 2015, in February, I think it was first week in February, we moved on to a nightmare house on the end of January. So there I was with two small children and a house that was falling down and heart failure. Now things are pretty good, actually.
Oh, what a turnaround. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that, because I know that, people with ICDs, I always love hearing from other people who have them as well. So thank you so much.
No problem.
Fearghal, back over to you for the Q&A.
Yes, and thank you very much, Ju, for sharing your story with us today. I always admire people like you that have gone through crisis situation and are happy to share very, very personal stories. And also thank you to Jana. So we're joined here again by Andrew, and we've got some questions from the audience. They're broken down into kind of two batches, some for you, Andrew, and some for you, Stewart, reflective of some of the stuff that Jana has been asking you as well. But kick off, Andrew, and maybe some of this was going over territory that we watched, but it's interesting that people are picking up on the details. So what's the difference between an ICD and a CRT-D?
That's a great question. An ICD typically will just have one lead, and it's quite a passive device. It just sits there in the background looking at the heart rhythm, and if you go into a very dangerous rhythm, it gives a shock. So nearly all the time it's just monitoring the situation. And some people, it will never be used, so it will sit there and never issue a shock. However, a CRT-D is a very active thing, and in fact is a treatment for heart failure in patients where the heart has become dysynchronous. So the two sides of the heart, the left and right ventricles, are contracting out of time with each other. And the CRT has three leads, one in the top chambers and two that go down to these two bottom chambers and retime the heart so that the two sides of the heart contract together. So that improves the efficiency of the heart, and the pumping function of the heart becomes better. So it paces the heart for every heartbeat, and it also has a defibrillator function, so it combines the two things there. The main other difference is that it really does improve the quality of life, symptoms, and the prognosis for sure in patients with dysynchrony.
Okay. Question number 2 for you as well, and I'm reading it. I think I know the answer, and it has risen in the thing, but I'm just asked. It has been upvoted 3 times. And why are heart failure patients fitted with ICDs?
So some patients with heart failure are at increased risk of sudden death, and where we're certain of that, we offer patients an ICD. And at the moment, the guidelines essentially say that if your ejection fraction, which is the amount of blood that the heart pumps with each heartbeat, is less than 35%, then most patients would be offered an ICD. But on the basis of that Danish trial, the guidelines are changing a bit. They've downgraded that and said that rather than you should definitely have one, you should just consider putting one in. So patients that have had an ischemic cardiomyopathy, we continue to offer them fairly routinely. for patients with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, the practice varies from one hospital to another, from one cardiologist to another. And that's because the evidence is lacking, and that's why the British trial is so important to answer this question about whether SCAR in particular is a better stratifier than just the ejection fraction on its own.
Okay. For you, Stewart, one comment. Respect, Stewart. You're a good man, helping others. That's an interesting comment. Good. Stewart, has your heart condition affected your work? And are there things you can no longer do in your profession, which of course we can tell from the labelling on your clothing, you're a fire service employee?
So initially, yes, because I wasn't fit enough. So I was totally not operational. My role is I'm a senior officer, so my role is command and control. So I'm kind of outside a building, pointing and shouting, as my firefighter colleagues tell me, is what I do. So it hasn't really affected my role. So I've now gone back to, well, shortly about 6 months after come back to work, I went back to full operational duties. I do a fitness test the same level as a firefighter, and so I complete that every 6 months. So it doesn't really affect me in that form. I think if I was an operational firefighter, I'd really struggle. Probably more with the fact that the ICD may get in the way a bit from like breathing apparatus, or where you might, in buildings where it's dark, or might knock into things. So it may affect me more if I was a firefighter operationally on a fire engine. But because I turn up and point and shout outside, it's affected me very little, if I'm honest. And work have been absolutely brilliant with me, and I know colleagues that I talk to throughout the service who have had problems with their heart. It makes a real big difference just to be able to talk it through. So it's been good.
Yeah. You've touched on your family a couple of times in your testimony. How have your family supported you through all of this?
Yeah, so I think it may be a cheesy comment, but they're the thing that, you know, kind of holds me up, really. My wife is a really strong character. She's really great for pushing me into, you know, doing things, and making sure that, you know, when I wasn't so confident, that, you know, she was the one that told me to go out for a run. Never mind that I don't hold that over her when my ICD went off. But yeah, they've been fantastic. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the big things that's missing. And not to be too morbid, you know, kind of my bit is easy, or was easy in that month that I was in hospital, because if I didn't come out of hospital, you know, I wouldn't know any different. Whereas she would have to live with that. She would have to live with 2 young children. And I think, you know, to a certain extent, I think that that's more difficult. So, you know, there's a huge amount of pressure and sort of emotional pressure, really, that they have to deal with. So, you know, they've done amazing and been brilliant support for me.
Yeah. And one questioner is asking, do you live your life differently since your surgery?
I probably should say yes with my doctor online. Not really. So not really. I live a really good life. I live a full life, and that was, you know, something that I didn't expect 8 years ago. So it doesn't have a huge effect on me, and I don't let it have a huge effect on me, is probably the truth.
Good. You touched on this earlier, but I'd be interested, Andrew, in your views on this from other patients' perspective as well. And how does it feel when an ICD goes off? Andrew or Stewart just touched on it again for us. But Andrew, if you could fill in about what other patients tell you as well. Yeah, so the description that Stewart gave is textbook, actually, and that's really typical. So some people would say, like, being kicked in the chest by a horse, or you know, just being walloped with a baseball bat. Those are the sorts of things that people say. After, so it's not
a long-lived pain. You get the pain at the time, and then the pain goes away typically. So it's just a sort of one-off. You can, as Stewart did, get more than one shock, and that can be quite distressing if it continues, particularly if you're awake throughout it all. Obviously, if you have a cardiac arrest and the heart essentially stops, most patients in that scenario won't even know they had a shock. They'll just know that they ended up on the floor. Or they might happen at night, and again, the patient's not quite sure what happened. But if it's an inappropriate shock and you're wide awake, it can be unpleasant and distressing, as Stewart described there. But we've become much better at preventing inappropriate shocks. The risk of that used to be about 10% per device, so over 10 years, 10% risk. That's gone down to between 1 and 2% with changes in programming that we make these days.
Okay, thanks very much. There's another one in love Stewart's attitude after everything's had to handle, and take my hat off to him. Andrew, for you, how do you balance being a consultant cardiologist and a researcher? This guy says, or girl says, I only have the one job and find that tough.
It has been quite a challenge, actually. The study that I'm running is a real challenge to run. The clinical job is obviously demanding. We've had the strike action, which has meant I've had to do relief work for the strikes, and so it has been tough. I'm now getting some dedicated research time in the job plan, which is really going to help. But I've had to, this has been a bit of a labour of love, actually, and certainly getting the application through the BHF. It's a very tough process. Obviously, a lot of scrutiny goes into the studies to make sure they're investing the money wisely. And that obviously creates a lot of work for the researchers. But I'm really pleased to have got the money. I think it's a really great question. And it's that's driving the work forward, really, is my will to get this done and find out the answer.
All right, and Stu, one link to the trial. What has your experience been like on the trial panel?
It's a bit intimidating to start with lots of doctors and professors and from all around the world, heart specialists, and then little me that doesn't know really anything clinical about heart. It's been really good. I know what I'm there for. I'm kind of there to ask a silly question, I guess. It's been a good experience and something that I'm delighted to be involved in. I really am.
Yeah, we're really grateful to Stu for giving up the time to do it, and it's really important, actually, because as doctors, you can miss things that are really important to patients, and to have patient involvement in how we make decisions, even if it's just to be there and say, actually, that's fine, that's really useful. To have that scrutiny there is really important.
Yeah, and two linked questions. One for you, Stewart. Given your experience, how do you think the message of self-awareness can be shared with others' signs and symptoms?
Well, that's quite a tricky question, I suppose. I think I don't know. I think to a certain extent, before I knew about anything, being aware that. So being a man, I'm typically not going to go to the doctors, and that's probably an aspect that needs to be maybe talked about a little bit more. So I didn't go to the doctors very much, and maybe extended, some of my symptoms probably longer than made things worse, probably. I think things like this and just having open conversations with people, I think are really important. Like I said, that I lost a bit of confidence, so I didn't really like to talk about anything. When I was first diagnosed, I stayed off work for a couple of months and didn't really talk to anyone. And I think actually more and more I've realized that discussing how things are, what you feel like, people are genuinely interested, and it can be really useful for others, in terms of that, just the information spread. So yeah, just it's a difficult one because everyone is very different, aren't they? But I think just being able to have a conversation is probably useful.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a very lengthy question in here, and I'm going to suggest that perhaps this person contact our heart helpline. But Andrew, he's concluding by saying that he's being diagnosed with bradycardia or irregular heartbeat, and it's causing him anxiety, not able to sleep. The palpitations are so loud that I feel like blocking my ears. So that's quite a clinical question. What should this person do?
Yeah, I think it's tough without all the clinical information to give
Yeah,
you good advice. And, I wouldn't want to mislead you. And I think the most important thing there would be to seek advice from either your GP or cardiologist, because the specifics of that could be important.
Yeah. And of course, we have a heart helpline for people to get in touch with if they want some immediate assistance or information. Andrew, also, how do you reassure patients like this person, Faith, who worry about having a shock from their device?
So I guess by using the numbers, so the fact that inappropriate shock rates are so low now is obviously really reassuring, both as an implanter. I don't want to put in a device that's going to shock someone unnecessarily, and obviously for patients, even more important. So the chances of that are much reduced. With remote monitoring now, again, that's also really useful, because if there's a fault with the device, we're likely to know about it before you, because most devices now are monitored from a little box of tricks in the house, which sends data to us about what's going on. So if there's a problem with the lead, which is another cause of inappropriate shocks, we should know about that earlier these days. And then, if it does go off, now the chances are that it's done that in a life-saving way. So, that's a success story, even though it might be unpleasant. It's necessary to improve the prognosis. So things are much better than they were even 5 years ago.
3 more quick questions for you, Andrew. What are the outcomes of the trial mean for people with heart failure who currently have an ICD fitted?
Probably won't affect that very much, unless you had to have your device explanted for some other reason. So if it got infected, then they could reassess you with the data of my study in their hands and say, maybe you don't need a new one fitting, or maybe it's really important that you do have a new one fitting, depending on the outcome. This is mostly concentrated on patients who haven't had a device yet.
And no pressure, Stewart. What's it like having Dr. Flett as your doctor?
I'm listening.
Who was the author of that one? Was that
it's
Dr.
an anonymous.
Flett?
It's anonymous attendee.
Yeah, it came from Dr. Flett, didn't it? Well, obviously, as I said, I've got an appointment coming up, so obviously everything will be rosy. No, I can't. Like being completely serious, I am absolutely blessed to have Dr. Flett as my doctor. He has been absolutely fantastic, and also I've got to say, the kind of mainstay of my information, my confidence, and getting better, like from what, 8.5 years ago. No, nearly 9 years. So I've got nothing but total respect and gratitude for Dr. Flett and everything that he has done for me, but I know does for everyone else. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Flett.
Thank you very much. That's really heartwarming.
And listening to and looking at you, Stewart, is testament to that. Thank you for watching this edition of Live and Ticking. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Stu. And thank you, the audience. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from all our brilliant speakers. Before we wind up, we'd like to go back to our traditional poll. How would you rate your knowledge now of BHF-funded research? Once again, 1's very little, 5 is a lot. I'll just give you a little moment to tick whichever box you now consider your knowledge level to be at. There we go. I think that has gone. That's a significant figure. If we haven't managed to answer your question today, then we encourage you to visit our Heart Helpline, where you can contact our dedicated clinical team about your query. All our incredible research is funded 100% by you, the public. If you've been inspired by the amazing science you've heard today, then all donations to support our life-saving work are very much appreciated. There's a link to donate should you wish to do so at the end of the event. Live and Ticking is a monthly webinar series, and we strive to produce the best events possible for you, our audience. Your feedback and comments are crucial to help plan and develop future events. So we ask if you can complete the survey at the end of this event or through an email you'll receive in the coming days. This Live and Ticking event was recorded and will be available soon on our YouTube channel. Our next event will take place on the 31st of January 2024 and will be on the topic of how cholesterol affects the heart. Thanks for joining us today. Have a good and peaceful Christmas and New Year. Goodbye.